is strong and not weak. And in such a society, you do not find voiceless sections or voiceless classes. Strong states are based on, their strength is based on equality. It is based on enforcement of fundamental rights. The problem arises when the system is not democratic, does not have a strong rule of law. It happens in authoritarian and totalitarian states. In a democratic, Pakistan is a democratic country. It has a constitution. The constitution guarantees fundamental rights. The constitution guarantees that there will be fair and free elections and that the country would be governed by the will of the people. This is what is on paper. Is this also something in reality? The reality is known to everyone. But when you have a system in which the constitution is restricted to a piece of paper, the fundamental rights are not enforced, then you have an authoritarian system. And in an authoritarian system, because authoritarian system relies on hierarchies, on status, there is no equality. Even human dignity is subservient to obedience and to order. Immorality is also defined by the authoritarian system. And who suffers the most in such a system? The weakest and the poor, those who do not have a voice. These are symptoms of fragile states and not of strong states. The litmus test of a strong state is to ask a question whether there are any voiceless lives in that society. If there are voiceless voices, and if young people like Hadi Ali Chattha and Iman Mazari, through a judicial order, can be declared as anti-state and terrorist only for raising concerns regarding voiceless people, then you have to ask a question whether we are governed under the Constitution or we live in an authoritarian system. And this was the story of Kawan, the elephant. And I need to give you a background of what had happened, because there were many things which I deliberately did not record in my judgment, because as a nation it would have been embarrassing for us. I was elevated to a high court known as the Islamabad High Court as a judge. Then I served in the same high court for 4 years as its Chief Justice. And I'm humbled. It is not a claim, but it is a matter of record. The independence of a high court is judged by the confidence of people in that high court. In those 4 years, I'm again humbled to say that some fearlessly independent and competent judges were elevated. People from Balochistan, aggrieved people, voiceless people, came to the court and did not leave without the relief. The cases of enforced disappearances start coming to that court. And they all were voiceless people. The only judgment in our jurisdiction relating to enforced disappearances is that from the Islamabad High Court, and that is Myra Sajid's case. The judgment on voiceless prisoners ordeals also came from that court during that period. And the conditions in which the prisoners, even those who were presumed to be innocent, the way they were treated, they didn't have a voice because that was never highlighted. There were environmental degradation cases that came to that High Court. The victims of eminent domain. Islamabad is a federal capital of this country. And none of us today in this hall would know that the palatial houses and buildings that have been built by the elites in Islamabad have been built on lands that were forcibly acquired and taken from those poor people, and they were never compensated. Their compensation since 1960s remained pending. And while the elites lived there, they never had a voice. But the judgment for them came from the Islamabad High Court. Women and children were being abused. But it was the trust and confidence of the people in an independent court that they approached it. And while all this a constitutional court was dealing with, 3 petitions were filed. And I must mention about those unsung heroes. The first petition came from the Wildlife Board and its chairman. It was regarding refusal by the Capital Development Authority to allow the shifting of a bear from the zoo to the Balkasar sanctuary. The second unsung hero was a medical practitioner, Dr. Umar. He had sought a writ against the government regarding the deplorable conditions in which Kawan the elephant was being held. And the third came from another enthusiast citizen, Miss Faryal, which was regarding the cruel treatment in which stray dogs were killed. These 3 petitions were clubbed. The difficulty for the court was that there was no jurisprudence. I surveyed the jurisprudence from across the country. By then, the jurisprudence that had evolved was from Argentina, the United States, and India. The Indian Supreme Court, regarding the religious event, had given a judgment and had extended the right to life under their constitution's Article 21 to the animals, in this case the cows. However, later the same Supreme Court recalled that judgment, set it aside. In Argentina, there were 2 judgments. One was regarding limited rights being granted in case of an orangutan, and the other in case of a chimpanzee. But they had only restricted it to the chimpanzee because they made it relatable to the attributes of chimpanzee with the humans. In the United States, there were judgments regarding chimpanzees, a horse named Justice, and then the classic case was that of Happy, the elephant incarcerated in the Bronx Zoo. But in all these cases, though the courts in the United States acknowledged that they were sentient beings, they could feel joy, they could feel pain, that they were not objects, but they didn't grant relief on the ground that under their constitution they were not persons. It is ironic that all the constitutions have been framed in the context of regulating humans and in context of the human rights. It was this personhood which held them back. In our case, though there was only this one petition which related to Kawan the elephant, but I was of a different view. In the background were all those human rights violations that I had dealt with. And I could see how important it was to recognize the rights of the non-human animals. What was the story of Kawan? That is most interesting. In the 1980s, there was a very repressive martial law in this country, ruled by General Ziaul-Haq. I don't know how many of you are aware of the atrocities that and human rights violations that took place there. I don't know whether you are aware of the colony textile mill incident in Multan, where more than 100 innocent laborers who were raising a voice for their demands were massacred. There were students in Sindh, and the Thori Junction incident, regrettably, is not known to anyone, where students were massacred. An elected Prime Minister was unconstitutionally removed and sent to the gallows, for which the Supreme Court, after 40 years, regretted.
Sir, can I briefly interrupt, sir? Actually, there are time limitations. 3 baje session khatam hona tha.
I'll conclude very quickly. Why I'm explaining this, that the same General Ziaul-Haq made a request to the Sri Lankan government that his child wanted an elephant. 1-year-old Kawan was abducted, and it had all the attributes of enforced disappearance, and brought and kept for a while in the backyard of General Ziaul-Haq's house. And then when Kawan started growing up, a zoo was established. And in that zoo, by the time the petition came before me, there were other 878 non-human animals. And they all were kept in deplorable conditions. The jurisprudence referred to and the judgment referred to